This time we're going to take a look at my custom Losi LMT race truck. I hope you got a lot of time on your hands because there is a lot to talk about. During the design and testing of the Losi LMT, I was writing down ideas for a race version that I could build once the truck was released, and I finally found time to make that happen. There's basically nothing on this truck that wasn't touched, and all modifications were made with racing in mind. The body I decided to use on this project is an old Ford Super Duty from Proline that I had in my stash from the magazine days. I found a cool paint job design on the internet and made it work with this body and completed it with Duratrax paint. The tire choice will change once I get to a race and see what the surface is asking for, but for now I bolted up a set of JConcepts Renegade tires in blue compound and glued them to a set of JConcepts white Tribute wheels. Now, I attached 25mm aluminum hexes to the wheels and will be machining down the front ones slightly to reduce scrub radius. The stock shocks that come on the LMT are very good units, but for the race version I decided to change over to Proline PowerStroke shocks. I did this only because the Proline shocks are a few grams lighter than stock, and every little bit adds up. I drilled the pistons to match the Losi shocks and I filled them with 20 weight oil, and I'm using the Losi yellow 1.1 pound springs all around. I designed these shock towers to give me more tuning options. The middle hole is the stock LMT position, and then I have one on the inside and outside of that. The thought is that this will allow me to change the angle of the shock and how it acts against the side-to-side sway of the chassis. In a way, it lets me fine-tune how the sway bar acts on it. That's just a thought, and only time will tell if the various angles will actually do anything. I removed the stock sway bars from the assembly and replaced the pieces with spring steel. I ran a flat for the set screws from end to end to give me as much length adjustment as possible. The bars themselves are supported by ball bearings, which removed any play in the system and made them friction free. I also took the time to machine down the end stops on the centerpiece, and I drilled them out to take off as much weight as possible. I designed my own chassis for this build because I wanted to rearrange the components in it, get more tuning options, reduce weight, and change up the look. The chassis plates are made out of 3mm thick carbon fiber with a dull finish that I picked up from Acer Racing, and I cut them out using my Stepcraft CNC router. The shock towers give me several mounting position when it comes to shock angle and chassis height, and I also gave myself an extra lower mounting position for the upper rear links. The other thing I did was straighten out the transmission housing and mounted the speed control and battery tray as low as possible and as close to the truck's center line as possible. I even made room for some brass weights to get the truck's center of gravity as low as possible. I designed a new outer transmission housing that's specific to my chassis, and I added the Losi logo and the HH for my logo to add a little style. The chassis has been slotted to allow for a lot more gear choices. The stock chassis only goes up to a 16 tooth, and this one can easily go into the 20s. The battery tray is a 3D printed piece that can be set up for a shorty pack or a standard lipo simply by changing the end plates. I made the end plates a little longer than necessary so I can move the battery around and adjust chassis balance. The speed control mount is also 3D printed and large enough for A-scale speed controls, and it's also a place to mount the receiver. Since the speed control and receiver are lighter than the battery, I designed the mount to have the ability to add brass weight underneath to balance out the front and rear weight of the chassis. Power for my truck comes from a Tekin RX8 speed control and a 4300 Pro4HD 550 size motor, also from Tekin. I've used this combo on some of my trucks in the past, and I really like how it works, and the speed control is really easy to tune. Steering is handled by a Tekin T-360 servo and is attached to a custom-made servo mount that's much stiffer than stock. The servo is a good-looking piece that's strong and has tuning options to get the feel of it just right. I made the 4-link bars out of aluminum rod that's 1mm smaller in diameter than stock. I also drilled them out to make them as light as possible. I took the time to adjust the shims on all the diffs so that they rotate as free as possible. And since this truck is much lighter than stock and I'll be toning down the torque of the power system, I went with 300,000 weight diff fluid in the center, 50,000 fluid in the rear, and I stuck with the stock 100,000 weight fluid in the front. The entire drivetrain of this truck runs on ceramic bearings from Acer Racing to make it roll as free as possible. Well, that's it. For now, that is. I have a few more things that I might make for this truck before it hits the track for the first time. New steering link, maybe front limit straps, maybe a little more brass at the bottom of the chassis. But for now, I'm really happy with how it turned out. And I'm looking forward to getting it fired up, out on my track, and dialed in to get it ready to go for that first race.